The silence where you used to be is crushing them. Not immediately. Not in the first days when their defense is still intact, when they're still telling themselves they're relieved. They needed the space, they're better off without the pressure you created. But as days turn to weeks, turn to months, and the silence continues, and you're not breaking it, and you're not coming back, the absence starts pressing down on them in ways they didn't anticipate and can't defend against. You're not there, and not being there is creating hole in their daily experience that they can't fill, can't ignore, can't make smaller through the usual defensive tactics. Your absence has weight, has presence of its own, has impact that's somehow larger than your presence ever had, because presence was something they could take for granted, could push against, could create distance from. But absence can't be negotiated with, can't be controlled, can't be managed through their patterns. The absence just is, permanent, heavy, undeniable. The avoidant thought your leaving would feel like freedom, thought the absence of your needs, your expectations, your desire for more closeness than they could give would create relief, space to breathe, room to be themselves without pressure. And maybe for a brief moment it did feel like freedom, like release from obligation, like escape from vulnerability that was becoming too uncomfortable. But the freedom turned out to be isolation. The space to breathe turned out to be emptiness. The room to be themselves turned out to be room where they're alone with themselves and their patterns, and the growing recognition that being alone with themselves isn't as comfortable as being defended against you was. They feel your absence heavily, more heavily than they felt your presence, more heavily than they'll admit to anyone, including themselves. The heaviness is teaching them something their defended state prevented them from learning while you were there. That you mattered, that you were filling space in their life they didn't know existed until the space was empty. That the relationship was meeting needs they didn't acknowledge having until the relationship ended, and the needs are screaming from not being met. Your absence is heavy because you were important. And important lost is heavier than important taken for granted. The specific ways they're experiencing the weight of your absence. They wake up and the first thought is, you're not there, not romantic missing, just factual recognition. You used to be accessible to them, now you're not. The morning reminder of your absence is setting tone for an entire day. Starting each day with loss instead of with connection creates accumulation of loss over time that gets heavier each morning. The morning weight used to dissipate as day went on and they got busy with other things. But now the weight isn't dissipating, it's just sitting there, constant, present. Undeniable background awareness that you're gone and not coming back. And the goneness is permanent state they have to wake up to indefinitely. They're experiencing your absence in their routine. You were integrated into their daily patterns in ways they didn't notice while you were there. Mornings included you. Evenings ended with you. Random moments throughout the day involved thinking about telling you something, or wondering what you were doing, or just feeling your existence as background presence in their awareness. The routine they built unconsciously included you. And now the routine has holes where you used to be. Holes they keep falling into. Keep reaching for you in moments that were shaped around you being there. The reaching for you who's not there is daily repeated experience of your absence that makes the absence heavier because it's not one big loss they experience once. It's hundreds of small losses they experience repeatedly throughout each day. They're feeling the absence in their physical space. Your stuff is gone. The space you occupied is empty. The environment looks different without your presence shaping it. Even if you never lived together, even if you only visited sometimes, you left imprint on their space that your absence has removed. And the removal is visible. Constant visual reminder that you're gone. They keep looking at the space where you used to be, where your things were, where you sat or slept or existed when you were with them. The looking at empty space where you used to be is experiencing your absence through their environment. The environment is heavy with your not being there. They're experiencing your absence through other people. Mutual friends mention you. They hear updates about your life through the social network. Each mention, each update, each piece of information about you is a reminder that you still exist, you're still living, you're just living without them. The reminder that you're living well without them makes the absence heavier because it means the absence is choice. You could be present, but you're choosing to be absent. The chosen absence is heavier than circumstantial absence because chosen absence means you decided they're not worth being present for. And being decided against, being chosen to be absent from, is weight that sits on their chest, making it hard to breathe. Why the absence feels heavier than the presence ever felt important. While you were present, they could take you for granted. Your presence was reliable, constant, something they didn't have to appreciate because they knew it would be there tomorrow. Taking for granted means not feeling the weight of importance, because importance is assumed. Assumed importance is invisible importance. But your absence removed the assumption, made the importance visible by removing it. Now they can see clearly what you were providing, what space you were filling, what needs you were meeting, because all of it is gone, and the goneness is showing them what was there through what's no longer there. The absence also feels heavier because it's activating their attachment system in ways presence never activated it. Attachment systems are designed to activate when attachment figure is unavailable or inaccessible. While you were present, while you were available, their attachment system could stay quiet. But your absence is triggering attachment panic. Their system is recognizing you as important attachment figure who's gone, and the goneness is creating biological response. Anxiety, hypervigilance, desperate desire to restore proximity to attachment figure. The biological response is heavy. It's in their body, not just their mind. Body level heaviness is heavier than mental heaviness because it can't be rationalized away or defended against through thinking. Your absence feels heavier because it's forcing them to feel things their defended state usually prevents them from feeling. While you were present, they could stay defended, could maintain emotional distance, could avoid feeling the depth of their attachment to you. But your absence broke through the defense. They can't stay defended against absence. Absence demands to be felt, and feeling what they've been defending against feeling is overwhelming. The feelings are heavy because they're unfamiliar, because they're intense, because the avoidant doesn't have skills to process them, so the feelings just sit there unprocessed, accumulating, getting heavier over time. The absence is also heavier because it includes regret. While you were present, they could tell themselves they'd do better eventually, they'd work on their patterns later, there was time to change. But your absence is permanent end of that possibility. No more eventually. No more later, no more time. The time was while you were there, and they didn't use it. The regret about not using the time they had is adding to the weight of your absence. They're not just experiencing your goneness, they're experiencing their own failure, their own responsibility for the absence, their own role in creating the permanent loss they're now suffering from. Regret is heavy. Regret mixed with loss is heavier than loss alone. What they're doing with the heaviness that makes it worse instead of better. They're trying to numb the heaviness through distraction and avoidance. Working longer hours, drinking more, keeping themselves busy with anything that prevents them from sitting still with the weight of your absence. The numbing provides temporary relief, but makes the heaviness worse long term, because heaviness that's not processed just accumulates. Each day they avoid feeling the weight is day the weight increases. The avoidance is creating backlog of unfelt feelings that's building pressure that will eventually either explode or collapse them. They're also trying to fill your absence with other people, dating quickly, pursuing casual connections, trying to replace you with someone, anyone, who might fill the space you left. But other people aren't you, don't fit the space shaped like you, don't meet the needs you are meeting. The attempts to fill your absence with people who aren't you is making them feel your absence more acutely, because every person who isn't you is a reminder that you're irreplaceable, that the space you occupied is yours alone, that they can't escape the heaviness of your absence by putting someone else in your place. The failed attempts at replacement are making the absence heavier by proving the absence is permanent. Some of them are reaching out to you, trying to make the absence stop being absence, trying to restore contact, trying to be friends or stay connected or maintain some thread that would make you less absent. But you're not responding, or you're responding minimally, or you're clearly not interested in maintaining connection. Each failed attempt to reduce your absence is confirmation that the absence is real, is chosen by you, is something they have no power to change. The powerlessness to make you less absent is adding to the heaviness. They're feeling your absence and they're feeling their own impotence to do anything about it. Double weight. They're also sitting in the heaviness without doing the work that would process it. Not going to therapy, not examining their patterns, not using the weight of your absence as motivation to change. Just sitting in the pain without transforming it into growth. Sitting in pain without growth is just suffering. The suffering is making them bitter, making them more defended, making them less capable of future connection. Your absence is heavy, and instead of using the heavy as catalyst, they're using the heavy as evidence that relationships don't work, that vulnerability leads to pain, that they were right to be defended. The defensive interpretation of the heaviness is ensuring the heaviness stays heavy indefinitely, because they're not processing it, just enduring it, while it makes them worse. The moments when the heaviness of your absence becomes unbearable. Late at night, when they can't sleep and there's nothing to distract from the absence. The heaviness presses down on their chest, making it hard to breathe. They're alone in bed in the dark, and your absence is more present than anything actually present. The not being able to sleep from the weight is when they come closest to admitting to themselves how much you mattered, how much they miss you, how heavy the absence really is. But even then, even at 3 a.m. when defenses are lowest, most of them still can't admit it fully. Can't let themselves feel it completely. Just lie there under the weight, trying to survive until morning, when they can rebuild the defense and pretend the heaviness isn't there. The heaviness becomes unbearable during holidays or special occasions or moments that used to include you. Your birthday passes, and they remember last year when they were with you. Their birthday comes, and you're not there to acknowledge it. Holidays that you celebrated together are now holidays they're spending alone or with others who aren't you. Each occasion is a sharp reminder of your absence. The sharpness makes the heaviness acute instead of chronic. Acute heaviness is harder to bear than chronic heaviness, because it demands attention in ways chronic heaviness can be backgrounded. The occasions are forcing them to confront directly that you're not there, and not being there matters intensely, even if they're still trying to pretend it doesn't. The heaviness becomes unbearable when they see you or hear about you being happy without them. The information that you're fine, that you're thriving, that your life is good without them in it, is information that makes your absence permanent in a new way. While they could imagine you were suffering from their absence too, the mutual suffering made the absence slightly more bearable. Misery loves company. But you're not suffering. You're happy. Your absence from their life is coexisting with your happiness in your own life. The knowledge that you don't need them, that you're better without them, that the absence of them from your life is maybe even positive for you, is weight that crushes. It's not just that your absence, it's that your absence from them is freedom for you. And being someone's freedom, being the person someone is happy to be absent from, is heaviness that's almost physical in its intensity. The heaviness also becomes unbearable in moments of crisis or difficulty when they need support and you're not there. Something goes wrong, something bad happens, they're struggling with something. And their instinct is to reach for you. You were their person, the one they'd turn to, the one who'd help them through difficulty. But you're not available anymore. The absence during crisis is heavier than absence during calm, because crisis reveals what you were providing that they didn't appreciate. Support, understanding, presence that made hard things manageable. Without you, hard things are harder. The increased hardness is weight of your absence measured in their decreased capacity to handle life without your support. How the heaviness is changing them in ways they're not aware of. The heaviness of your absence is making them more anxious in general, not just about you. The anxiety from losing you is bleeding into everything. They're more worried, more tense, more on edge about things that wouldn't have bothered them before. The generalized anxiety is their system responding to the loss of you by becoming hypervigilant to all potential losses. If they could lose you, they could lose anything. If attachment to you ended badly, all attachments might end badly. The anxiety is a defense mechanism, but it's also evidence of how deeply your absence affected them. The depth of effect is proportional to your importance. Heavy absence means you were critically important even though they couldn't show it while you were there. The heaviness is also making them more defensive with new people. They are protecting themselves from future heavy absences by preventing future presence from mattering too much. More guarded, more distant. More careful not to let anyone get close enough to create heavy absence when they inevitably leave. The increased defense is them trying to protect themselves from feeling this heaviness again. But increased defense also ensures increased isolation. They're making themselves safer from future heaviness by making themselves unable to have future connection. The protection is killing possibility. Your absence is teaching them to defend better against future presence. And defending against presence is defending against life. The heaviness is changing their identity in ways they're resisting acknowledging. They thought they were a person who doesn't need people, who's fine alone, who's unbothered by relationships ending. But the heaviness of your absence is proving that identity was a lie. They do need people. They're not fine alone. They're very bothered by this relationship ending. The gap between the identity they performed and the reality they're experiencing is creating identity crisis. They don't know who they are if they're not the unbothered, independent person. And not knowing who you are while experiencing heavy absence is being lost while being alone. Double crisis that's changing them whether they're aware of it or not. The heaviness is also teaching them that their patterns don't protect them from pain. The entire point of their defensive patterns was to avoid pain, avoid vulnerability that creates pain, avoid attachment that ends in pain, avoid need that leads to pain when need isn't met, but your absence is pain. Deep pain, heavy pain, pain that's not being prevented by the patterns that were supposed to prevent it. The patterns created the conditions for your absence by pushing you away, and your absence created the pain the patterns were supposed to prevent. The teaching is that defense doesn't work, but most of them aren't learning the lesson. They're experiencing the pain while doubling down on the defense that created the pain. Illogical, but human. When what you've always done stops working, you often just do it harder instead of doing something different. Why they can't tell you how heavily they're feeling your absence. Telling you would require admitting they need you, admitting they were wrong to create the distance that led to your absence, admitting their patterns destroyed something they actually valued. The admissions are too threatening to their defended identity. Their identity requires maintaining that they don't need anyone, that they were right to create space, that losing you was acceptable outcome. Telling you the absence is heavy contradicts all of that, so they stay silent about the heaviness, while the heaviness crushes them invisibly. Telling you would also make them vulnerable to you in ways they're terrified of. If you know the absence is heavy for them, you have power. Power to relieve the heaviness by returning. Power to make the heaviness worse by refusing to return. Power to use their admission against them. The vulnerability of admitting the heaviness is vulnerability they've spent their life avoiding. They'd rather suffer in silence than be vulnerable about the suffering. The silence protects them from vulnerability while ensuring the suffering continues unrelieved. They also can't tell you, because telling you might make you feel obligated to do something about their suffering, and they don't want to be burdened, don't want to pressure you, don't want to manipulate you into coming back through making you feel guilty about the heaviness your absence is creating. The not wanting to burden is actually them wanting to maintain illusion of being fine, being independent, being unbothered even while they're clearly bothered. The illusion is more important than the relief that honesty might bring. Some of them also can't tell you because they don't have words for what they're experiencing. Heaviness is feeling they're having not thought they're thinking. They're not practiced at naming feelings, at articulating internal states, at putting words to emotional experience. The absence is heavy, but they can't describe the heaviness in ways that would communicate it to you. The inability to articulate is keeping them trapped in the experience without ability to share it, process it, or get support for it. What would have to happen for the heaviness to become lighter? The heaviness would have to be processed through grief work. Real grieving where they feel the full weight, cry the tears, sit with the pain instead of avoiding it. Grieving that includes accepting the loss is permanent, that you're not coming back, that the relationship is over. Grieving that moves them through denial and anger and bargaining and depression to eventual acceptance. The acceptance is when heaviness can start to lift, but acceptance requires sitting with the heavy long enough to process it. Most avoidants don't sit with it. They avoid it, and avoiding it keeps it heavy indefinitely. The heaviness would also lighten through them doing therapeutic work on their patterns, understanding why they create distance, processing their attachment wounds, developing capacity they didn't have. The therapeutic work wouldn't bring you back, but it would help them integrate the loss, understand their role in creating it, and become a different person who could have different outcomes in future relationships. The work is hard. Most don't do it, so the heaviness stays heavy because it's unexamined, unprocessed, just endured without transformation. They'd also need to make amends if possible. Apologize to you, take full responsibility for their patterns, acknowledge the hurt they caused. Not to get you back, but to relieve their own guilt and regret that's adding to the heaviness. Real amends, amends that are about acknowledging harm, not about getting forgiveness, could lighten some of the weight. But most can't make real amends, because real amends require vulnerability they can't access and accountability they can't take. The heaviness would lighten through time if they're using the time productively. Time alone doesn't heal, but time spent processing, growing, changing can eventually make the absence less heavy. The absence might always be there. You might always be person they lost. But the heaviness could eventually become manageable weight instead of crushing weight, eventually becomes integrated part of their story, instead of active crisis. But eventually requires work. Time without work is just time passing while heaviness stays heavy. Why you shouldn't let their heaviness change your boundaries. They're feeling your absence heavily. The feeling is real, the weight is crushing them. And none of that creates obligation for you to make yourself present to relieve their heaviness. Their experience of your absence is consequence of their patterns. Consequence they earned through treating you in ways that made you leave. The heaviness is theirs to sit with, theirs to process, theirs to learn from if they're capable of learning. You making yourself present to relieve their heaviness would be you sacrificing your well-being to manage their feelings, would be you taking responsibility for pain they created through their own choices, would be you enabling their patterns by showing them that if they suffer enough from consequences, you'll come back and remove the consequences. The enabling would prevent them from learning what they need to learn, would prevent the growth that only comes from sitting with consequences long enough to be motivated to change. Your boundaries exist to protect you from being hurt by them again. The boundaries are working. They're feeling your absence heavily, which means the boundaries are strong, are being maintained, are creating the separation that protects you. Weakening the boundaries, because they're suffering from them, would be choosing their comfort over your protection. Their suffering doesn't obligate you to make yourself vulnerable to them again. Your protection is more important than their pain, even if their pain is real and heavy. You also don't know if the heaviness would motivate them to be different, or if your presence would just let them return to same patterns. Most likely they're feeling the absence heavily, but haven't done any work to become someone who could be with you differently. Returning to them would just recreate the dynamic that didn't work. They'd feel better temporarily because absence stopped being absent, but the patterns that created the absence would still be there. Eventually the patterns would push you away again, and you'd go through the same cycle, leaving again, them feeling your absence heavily again, except next time leaving would be harder because you'd already come back once. The cycle prevents growth. Your boundaries prevent the cycle. The final truth about them feeling your absence heavily while you maintain your distance. They feel your absence heavily. The heaviness is real, is crushing them, is teaching them about what you meant, what they lost, what their patterns cost them. The heaviness is consequence working exactly as consequences should work. Creating pain that might motivate change, creating weight that might drive them to therapy, creating suffering that might teach them not to repeat patterns that create this level of suffering. But the heaviness is theirs, their experience, their consequence, their weight to carry, not your responsibility to relieve, not your burden to lift, not your problem to solve. You've already carried enough in the relationship, carried the emotional labor, carried the hope, carried the trying to make it work while they stayed defended. You're done carrying. Now they carry the weight of your absence. And the weight teaching them what your presence was worth is teaching they should have learned while they had you, but could only learn through losing you. They feel your absence heavily. You feel your freedom lightly. The contrast is evidence of growth, of healing, of boundaries working, of you choosing yourself over someone who couldn't choose you despite feeling your absence heavily enough that the heaviness is disrupting their entire life. The heaviness is theirs. The lightness is yours. You've earned the lightness through the work of leaving, processing, becoming unbothered. They've earned the heaviness through the patterns that pushed away someone who mattered. Both experiencing what they've earned, both living with consequences of their choices. Theirs to suffer from the absence, yours to thrive in the freedom. How the heaviness of your absence is manifesting in their physical body. The absence isn't just psychological weight. It's physical. They're experiencing it in their body in ways they can't ignore or rationalize away. Their chest is tight constantly, like something is pressing down on their sternum, making full breaths difficult. The tightness is their body responding to the loss, to the stress of your absence, to the anxiety of not having access to you anymore. They're taking shallow breaths all day without realizing it. The shallow breathing is creating fatigue, is making them feel constantly on edge, is keeping their nervous system in low-level panic state that never fully resolves. They're not sleeping, or they're sleeping poorly. Lying awake for hours thinking about you, about what they lost, about the absence that's become their constant companion. When they do sleep, they're dreaming about you. Waking up multiple times per night, never reaching deep restorative sleep because their system is too activated by the absence to fully rest. The sleep deprivation is accumulating, making them irritable, making them less capable of regulating emotions, making the weight of your absence feel even heavier because they're too exhausted to carry it properly. The exhaustion and the absence are feeding each other in cycle. That's breaking them down physically. Their appetite is different. either eating too much, trying to fill the emptiness your absence created, or eating too little because the heaviness in their chest leaves no room for food. The relationship between them and food has changed because you were part of their eating routines, were person they ate with or cooked for or thought about while eating. Every meal is a reminder of your absence. The physical relationship to food being disrupted by emotional absence is evidence of how thoroughly you are integrated into their life. Can't even eat without being reminded you're gone. They're experiencing psychosomatic symptoms, headaches that won't respond to medication, stomach problems with no physical cause, muscle tension that creates pain in their neck, their shoulders, their back. The body is manifesting the emotional weight of your absence through physical symptoms because the emotional weight is too heavy to be contained just in emotions. The body has to express what the mind can't process. Each physical symptom is their body saying, "This absence is too heavy. This loss is too much. You need to deal with this," instead of just enduring it. The ways the heaviness is affecting their relationships with other people. They're more irritable with everyone, not just in contexts that remind them of you. Friends are commenting that they're different, that they seem angry or distant or not themselves. The irritability is displaced emotion from the heaviness of your absence. They can't express the heaviness directly, so it comes out sideways as irritation with people who don't deserve it. The irritation is pushing people away at a time when they most need support. But they can't stop being irritable because the weight of your absence is creating constant, low-level frustration that expresses itself as irritability toward whoever is closest. They're also withdrawing from social situations, declining invitations, avoiding gatherings, staying home alone, where the absence is heavy but at least they don't have to perform being okay around others. The withdrawal is them protecting themselves from having to explain why they're different, why they're not themselves, why the absence is affecting them this deeply. But the withdrawal is also making the absence heavier because isolation intensifies feeling. They're alone with the heaviness, and the aloneness makes the heaviness grow. Some are clinging to people in ways they didn't cling before, needing constant company, needing distraction from the absence, using other people as buffers between them and the heaviness. But the clinging is desperate quality that's uncomfortable for the people being clung to. The desperation is visible, and it's creating distance even as they're trying to create closeness. People can feel when they're being used as distraction rather than engaged with as themselves. The clinging is backfiring, creating more isolation, making the absence of you even more pronounced because everyone else is making them aware they're not you, can't fill the space you left, can't make the heaviness lighter. They're also comparing every interaction to interactions with you. This person doesn't understand them like you did. That person doesn't make them feel comfortable like you did. No one is measuring up because no one is you. The comparing is making all their relationships feel inadequate, making them feel more alone even when they're with people, making your absence heavier through constant reminder that you're irreplaceable. The comparing is also unfair to the people they're comparing to you. But they can't stop comparing because you're the standard their attachment system is still oriented toward. The specific memories that make the absence feel heaviest. They remember the last time they saw you and they're replaying it obsessively. What you said, what they said, how you looked, the exact moment you left. They're analyzing every detail, trying to find the point where they could have done something different, said something different, being someone different that would have prevented the absence. The replaying is torture because it shows them all the moments they failed, all the opportunities they missed, all the ways they contributed to creating the permanent absence they're now suffering under. But they can't stop replaying because replaying is their mind trying to undo what can't be undone, trying to change what's permanent, trying to make the absence not be absent. They remember a specific moment of happiness with you, and the memory makes the absence excruciating. They remember you laughing at something they said. Remember feeling close to you in a particular moment. Remember time when things were good between you and they felt connection. They usually defend against feeling. The memory of happiness is painful because it shows them what they had, what they lost, what the absence means they'll never have again. Happy memories when you're gone are heavier than painful memories because happy memories show you what you're missing, while painful memories at least let you tell yourself you're better off. They can't tell themselves they're better off. The happy memories prove they're worse off. And worse off is heavy. They remember the specific ways you cared for them, and they're feeling the absence of that care acutely. You did things for them, supported them in specific ways, showed up for them in moments when they needed someone. The specific acts of care are what they're missing most, because care is what they defended against receiving, while simultaneously depending on receiving it. The absence of your care is showing them how much they needed it, how much they were depending on it, how much harder their life is without someone caring for them the way you cared. The recognition of need through absence of the thing needed is heaviness that sits in their stomach, making them feel sick. They also remember the last time they hurt you, and they can see your face, can see the exact moment something in you broke, can remember your pain that they caused. The memory is heaviest of all because it's mixing the absence with guilt. You're gone and they're responsible for you being gone. The absence is heavy, the responsibility for the absence is heavier. They can't separate the missing you from the knowing they destroyed what they're missing. The combination is weight that's almost unbearable. Almost. But they're bearing it because they have to. Because the absence is permanent and the responsibility is permanent. And bearing both is just their reality now. Why some of them will eventually reach out from under the weight. The heaviness eventually becomes unbearable enough that some of them break. They reach out. Not because they've changed. Not because they've done the work. Just because the heaviness is crushing them and they're desperate to make it stop. They reach out hoping you'll relieve the weight by coming back, by engaging, by making yourself less absent. The reaching out is them trying to manage their pain, not trying to repair the relationship or acknowledge their patterns. The desperation is obvious in how they reach out. The neediness is visible, and the visibility of their need is them finally showing what they could never show while you were there, what your absence has forced to the surface through sheer weight of missing you. But reaching out from under the weight without having done the work is reaching out that won't create anything healthy. They're still the same person with the same patterns, with the same incapacity. They're just experiencing enough pain from the consequences that they're willing to risk vulnerability to make the pain stop. The vulnerability is pain-driven, not growth-driven. And pain-driven vulnerability disappears the moment the pain is relieved. If you respond to their reaching out, if you make yourself less absent, the heaviness will lift enough that their defended state will return. They'll go back to their patterns. The cycle will repeat. The reaching out is them trying to escape consequences, not trying to become someone who won't create the same consequences again. Some will reach out with apologies and promises. They're sorry, they recognize what they did wrong, they'll change, they'll be different. The promises are sincere in the moment because the heaviness is making them sincere. But sincerity driven by discomfort is different from sincerity driven by transformation. The heaviness is creating temporary sincerity that will fade when the heaviness fades. Unless they've done therapeutic work, unless they have evidence of actual change sustained over time, the promises are just words meant to relieve their current suffering. Words without work behind them. Words without capacity to back them up. Words that will evaporate the moment you give them what they want, which is relief from the heaviness of your absence. What the heaviness reveals about what you actually meant to them, the heaviness of your absence is proportional to your importance. Light absence means light importance. Heavy absence means heavy importance. They're feeling your absence heavily, which means you mattered intensely, even though they couldn't show it while you were there. The heaviness is confession. They needed you more than they admitted. You meant more than they could express. The relationship was more significant than they could acknowledge while defended. The heaviness is truth their defended state prevented them from showing while you were present, but can't prevent them from experiencing now that you're absent. The heaviness also reveals that the connection was real, was mutual, was deep even if it was unexpressed on their side. You felt the connection, they denied the connection, but the heaviness proves the connection existed. They can't feel absence this heavily unless presence was significant. Can't miss someone this profoundly unless the someone was important. Can't experience weight this crushing unless what's absent had substance, had meaning, had impact on their life that they minimized while it was happening, but can't minimize now that it's gone. The heaviness reveals they were attached in ways they couldn't admit. Attachment is what creates heavy absence. You don't feel heavy absence from someone you weren't attached to. The heaviness is their attachment system finally showing itself, finally being undeniable, finally forcing them to confront that there's someone who attaches deeply despite performing someone who doesn't attach at all. The performance was lie. The heaviness is truth. They're attached to you. The attachment is why the absence is heavy. And the attachment being undeniable through the heaviness is them finally being confronted with their own capacity to need someone, to depend on someone, to be affected by someone in ways they've organized their entire identity around, denying. The permanent ways the heaviness will change their future, The heaviness of your absence will make them more cautious about getting close to anyone new. They learn from you that attachment creates vulnerability to heavy absence. They're experiencing the heavy absence, and it's teaching them that caring about someone means risking this level of pain when the person leaves. The teaching is making them more defended, more careful, more committed to never letting anyone matter this much again, because mattering this much means experiencing this much pain when loss happens. The increased defense will protect them from future heavy absences by preventing future presences from becoming important enough to create heavy absences. But the protection will also keep them isolated, keep them alone, keep them from ever having the connection they're currently suffering from losing. The heaviness will also follow them into every future relationship as comparison point. They'll never feel heavy absence like this again unless they let someone matter as much as you mattered. And letting someone matter as much as you mattered requires vulnerability they've now learned leads to this level of suffering. So future people won't matter as much, won't be allowed to matter as much. Will be kept at distance that prevents heavy absence by preventing deep attachment. The future relationships will be shallower, safer, less vulnerable to creating this kind of pain. But shallow and safe also means unsatisfying, means lonely even when with someone, means going through motions of relationship without experiencing the depth that makes relationship meaningful. The heaviness of your absence is teaching them to avoid future heaviness by avoiding future depth. And life without depth is life half-lived. They'll carry you permanently as the standard, as the one they lost, as the relationship that mattered most, not because it was objectively the best relationship. Because it's the relationship whose absence is heaviest. Heaviest absence means most important presence. You'll be the person they measure everyone against, the person they'll think about when they're with someone else. The person whose absence will haunt every future presence because no future presence will create absence as heavy as your absence is creating. You'll be permanent ghost in their future. Permanent weight they carry. Permanent evidence that they're capable of deep attachment and fundamentally incapable of sustaining deep attachment, because their patterns destroy what their attachment needs. Why understanding the heaviness doesn't change what you should do. They feel your absence heavily. The feeling is real, is crushing them, is evidence of how much you mattered. And none of it changes that they hurt you, that the relationship didn't work, that they couldn't meet your needs. The heaviness they're experiencing now doesn't undo the pain you experienced then, doesn't repair the damage their patterns created, doesn't make the relationship viable when their capacity hasn't changed. They're suffering from your absence. That's their consequence. You suffered from their presence when their presence was marked by emotional unavailability and defended distance. That was your experience that drove you to leave. Their heaviness also doesn't create capacity they didn't have. Feeling your absence heavily doesn't teach them to be vulnerable, doesn't develop their emotional regulation, doesn't heal their attachment wounds, doesn't create skills for intimacy and consistency and showing up. The heaviness is feeling. Capacity is skill set developed through therapeutic work over time. They can feel heavily while remaining exactly as incapable as they were when they lost you. And incapacity is what determines whether a relationship is viable, not how heavily they feel your absence. You also can't sacrifice yourself to relieve their heaviness. Their heaviness is about them missing you, needing you, wanting you back. But you being back would require you to return to a relationship with someone who proved they can't meet you, who hasn't done work to become different, who's just suffering enough from consequences that they want the consequences removed. Removing yourself as consequence by making yourself present again would be you choosing their relief over your protection, would be you prioritizing their comfort over your well-being, would be you sacrificing your needs to meet their wants. You've already done too much of that. The heaviness is theirs to carry. Your boundaries are yours to maintain. They feel your absence heavily. You feel your freedom lightly. Both are consequences of their patterns. Both are teaching what needed to be taught. The heaviness is teaching them about what they lost, about what their patterns cost them, about the weight of consequences they've been avoiding through finding people who would absorb the consequences instead of reflecting them back. Your lightness is teaching you about your strength, about your capacity to let go, about your worthiness of relationship, where presence creates joy, not pain, where leaving creates relief, not heaviness, where being with someone makes your life lighter, not heavier. They carry the heavy. You carry the light. Both are exactly what each of you earned through the choices each of you made. Their heaviness is theirs. Your lightness is yours. And the separation between the heavy and the light is the boundary that protects you from taking on weight that isn't yours to carry, while they learn what weight feels like when there's no one there to help them carry it.